And on the campaign trail, Trump promised the biggest tax cuts since the Reagan administration. Now corporations are looking to see how the president-elect's tax plan will impact them. Joining us now is Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist. Grover, Trump is proposing slashing the corporate tax rate down to 15%. It'd be lower for money brought in from overseas, repatriated here. Does it get done?
Well, it will certainly happen, and that's the good news. It's a great plan. Our corporate rate's at 35. The European average is 23. We're not competitive in the world. We wonder why companies hire overseas rather than here. We do it. Our government does that. It's not something corporate America does to be annoying. Our government drives American jobs overseas. That 35% down to 15 will make us competitive with almost all the other nations of the world. It's an incredibly important first start. And the reason it will happen is that we have a Republican House. Paul Ryan's plan that he's designed, along with Ways and Means Chairman Brady, takes the rate to 20%. I think it's pretty easy to compromise between 20 and 15. I vote for 15, but 20 and 15 is not far apart. In the House, you've got Senator Hatch looking to figure out how to end the double taxation of corporate income, also in exactly the same zone. So we have a real opportunity through reconciliation, which only requires 51 votes in the Senate. It can't be filibustered. So this bill will happen, and the president, Trump's plan, Paul Ryan and Brady's House plan, and Hatch on the Senate are sitting around a table in large agreement on reducing the cost of investment, reducing the cost to hire people, reducing taxes on individuals as well as businesses, and allowing the $2 trillion that's overseas now to come back to the United States. I hope they do it completely tax-free. There's no reason to hit it at all. You want that money to come back. You don't want to punish people for bringing it back.
Well, the Democrats want it, and that's been talked about as a sweetener. The Democrats want it so they can spend it. So
there's no reason to sweeten. We don't need a single Democrat vote on this tax bill. There's no reason to allow taxes to be higher than they need to make some Democrat feel good about it. They're not going to be voting for this bill.
Well, let me ask you that, because I've heard the opposite argument that you shouldn't use reconciliation because because that's what essentially was done with Obamacare, that you had President Obama shoving the Affordable Care Act down the throats of Republicans. So there needs to be more hand-holding, if you will. But then you start getting into a back and forth with Chuck Schumer. But but you're saying reconciliation versus bringing Democrats in.
Well, if the Democrats are willing to vote for a pro-growth tax cut, which they have not been willing to do since 1986, it has now been quite some time since any Democrat has cast a vote. The Bush tax cuts were all Republican projects. The tax increases by both Clinton and Obama were all Democrat projects. Look, this is the one issue, taxes, where there is no agreement between Republicans and Democrats. Some Republicans get silly and want to spend money. Some Democrats are willing to not spend money from time to time, but no Democrat won't vote for a tax increase, and we haven't been getting their support for tax reduction, and no Republican is going to vote to raise taxes. So this is the issue that most divides the two parties.
So, Grover, speaking of spending, and we're talking about this tax cut, which I think most business is going to be incredibly supportive of.
Yes.
But the Trump administration is talking about a massive infrastructure spending bill. How are we going to pay for that if we're cutting taxes? What's the plan here?
Well, when the president talks about getting infrastructure spending going, there's a series of things here. First, there are 24 major projects in the Midwest, 7 in Pennsylvania alone, that are being held up because of the EPA and other federal regulatory things. This is billions and billions of dollars and thousands and tens of thousands of jobs that don't exist today because Obama's government decided to use regulations to not let these are privately funded. But they're infrastructure, it's pipelines, things like that. Simply getting the government out of the way. I hope the president goes to those 24 cities and towns and does one of his political rallies and brings 40,000 people together and says, we need this project, we need this pipeline, we need these jobs, and those jerks in the bureaucracy had better hear both me and you today talking about this. That doesn't cost a penny. That's extremely helpful. And there are a number of things where if the government would get out of the way, if we got rid of the Davis-Bacon Act, it would reduce the cost of all government-funded roads, federally funded roads, by about a quarter or a third, because it adds on additional costs. That's more roads. It's not more tax dollars. So there's a lot that can be done to build roads. And I always worry a little bit when somebody says infrastructure, because it's used by the left to mean things that aren't actually roads.
Right.
And
Mike
we've
Murphy?
got enough bike paths right now.
Hey, Grover, it's Mike Murphy. So I'm with
Hey,
you.
Mike.
I think we need a tax cut, and I think 15–20% to really make the U.S. competitive on a global scale. But so is you're thinking that less regulation and the growth that would be spurred by these tax cuts, is that enough to offset the loss in revenue when we go from 35 to 15–20% for businesses?
Yeah, I think when we look at the Reagan years, where we had a 22% across-the-board tax cut, and you saw strong economic growth, there's more money being raised by the Reagan administration at the end than at the beginning because of growth. If you grow at 4% a year, which is what the Reagan administration did, compared to 2% a year, which is the Obama rate or the French rate, that raises $5 trillion over a decade, not from tax increases, but from more growth. So we can cut taxes a lot in a 10-year window to have enough growth, but then end up with $5 trillion more in revenue just from growth. There are tax cuts that, quote-unquote, pay for themselves. We should be for lower taxes because it's not the government's money. We should be for tax cuts whether it loses revenue or gains revenue, but there is a lot of revenue that comes in from economic growth. Deregulation is a very important part of that. I'm very glad that President-elect Trump has really focused on that. No one has, going back until you go back to Reagan. Trump is doing that.
Grover, it was great to see you. Incredible insight as always. Grover Norquist,
Okay.
take care. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
You too. Thank you.